I'd looked up on our weather app and it said it was going to keep going for 4 more hours. And we'd already done the Maurice Blanche that morning, and so we were pretty tired. And we were like, that's going to be until like darkness, basically. We've still got a massive ride to go. So we've got to get off this mountain somehow. So that's when we started hitchhiking. And luckily Mary met a lovely man who was very reassuring.
He was like a prophet for us. he had this white van. I stopped him. I asked whether he had any space. He didn't. He had machinery in the back. But he just says to me in French, there's some shelter up on the right and the storm will pass. And he couldn't have told us 2 wiser things. We were able to find this little doorway where we could change, have a little almond croissant, and then another 20 minutes later the storm was gone and off we could ride and finish our day.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on 2 wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm very excited to introduce my guests for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Chloe Sanderson and Mary Thornton. I first came across Chloe and Mary on the upper slopes of the Col du Tourmalet. I'd spotted 2 cyclists stopped by the side of the road and seen the panniers on their bikes. Decided to spot and chat. My curiosity got the better of me, of course. And then I was ridiculously excited to find out they were partway through cycling the Raid Pyrenees route. This would see them cross over from the Atlantic Ocean over a whole mountain range until reaching the Mediterranean. Given I myself would be taking on the same route a few weeks later, we swapped details and agreed to catch up in the aftermath to see how it all went. So here we are, many mountains cycled up and down, and no doubt some incredible adventures and memories to talk about. Chloe and Mary, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
As I said, I am ridiculously excited. I think we mentioned just before, it's a bit similar for me, like watching like a TV travel show that's visiting an area you've been to. You're sort of excited to see what memories sort of get re-sparked. And I feel that this conversation is going to do that a lot for me, and vice versa, possibly for both of you as well. But before we get into the details of this trip, a question I like to ask all my guests to start off the show is, do you remember the very first bike you rode? So, Mary, we might kick off with you first. Do you remember the very first bike you rode as a child?
I do. Well, I don't remember the exact details of it, but I remember being on a bicycle, having the stabilizers taken off, and my dad sort of having to relentlessly push me around Wimbledon Common, just hoping that I'd learn to pedal. And it was never successful until we went to France, and he just let me go off the top of this little grass hill. And after that, I could cycle, and he was thrilled.
You needed to take that first trip to France to find out that wheel of freedom. And it's interesting that we're coming back to you to talk about a cycling adventure that you've had now in France as an adult too. I think that's pretty cool. What about you, Chloe? Can you remember the first bike you rode, Chloe?
So I think I was more of a passenger for my first bike. I used to sit on my sister's pannier as a tiny child and be pedalled round the garden by her, which was always quite perilous because you might fall off at any moment. But I think I learnt my balance through that. So that's kind of my earliest cycling memories, is being ferried around.
In Australia, I think we call that like dinking, like on your brother or sister's or a friend's bike, and it was like dinking a ride. Do you remember doing that older as well, like with friends?
A little bit, yeah. I've definitely done that into my 20s.
I love it. Sorry, it's just made me happy to hear that as well. It's like that youthful adventure that sticks with us.
It's a skill.
Definitely. Balance is a good one to have, obviously not just for riding bikes, but I feel like riding bikes up and down big mountain passes as well. Balance and knowing your sort of centre of gravity helps us there as well. Before we get into the details of both of you taking on the Raid Pyrenees, I wondered whether or not we could find out a little bit about how is it that you both know each other, and where does your friendship sort of spark from there?
So back in 2017, we both were going to volunteer for an NGO. We're both doctors. And the NGO put us in contact because we were getting on the same flight. And so I get this email from Chloe going, just so you know who I am in the airport, I'm tall, brown hair, I'll be carrying a purple sports bag, and I've got a good sense of humour. And sort of from there, so we met in the toilets actually at the airport, bumped into each other. And from there, a beautiful friendship started. And we had some fun time volunteering together and then just kept in contact and been great friends ever since.
I think our third ever hangout was a holiday together. Went hiking together and stuff. So it's always been quite intense and fantastic.
Where did you go on that holiday?
It was at the Lake District.
Yeah,
just in North England, like a 4-day multi-hike. Got to know each other's sort of excellent adventure characteristics during that.
So again, outdoors and hiking there's a little bit of a theme. You mentioned you're both doctors as well, and obviously volunteering. So there's sort of like a mutual sort of similarity there as well. But I wonder then, in terms of personalities, are you both sort of outdoor adventure seekers?
Yeah, I think we're pretty well matched with that, actually. I think probably the most common theme between us, Bella, I think you'd be the same too, is we're like a little bit stubborn and very optimistic, and that can take you a long way. So as long as it sounds fun and like we might be able to achieve it, then we're usually up for it.
Stubborn and optimistic. It's interesting because I guess with the benefit of hindsight, looking back on this trip of what we took on, and I say we, I know we did it separately. Well, you did it together, but my trip was definitely separate. But some stubborn optimism is actually quite a good little quality to have in your back jersey pocket, especially for some of these really steep and spicy climbs. Not all of them were steep and spicy. I certainly have some favourites which were certainly not steep as spicy whatsoever. But it's those steeper, tougher ones that live longer in my memory. But yeah, stubborn optimism. I love that. So then cycling, we spoke there briefly. You had a holiday together in the Lake District and that was hiking. Cycling trips, have you cycled together? Like, do you cycle together just generally?
We started going on a few cycling trips together, just locally, day cycles. And we've done a few of them since. Chloe's brother and sister-in-law cycle, so we've done a bit with them. But this is our first big trip together. Yeah, we had amazing trips out to Kent. And I mean, I grew up in Kent and there were areas that I just had never explored. And so it's like a really lovely time.
So in terms of big cycling trips then, so this Pyrenees raid, the traverse of the Pyrenees, whose idea was this?
I would say it was a joint idea. So we kind of had a couple of weeks off work and we decided we wanted to do a cycle. Chloe very helpfully bought a book of, the best cycles around Europe. She came over for dinner one day and I can't really remember why we settled on it, but it just was the one that we both looked at the pictures and thought, oh, that's pretty beautiful. And also a real appeal was we could get a ferry to the starting point, and we weren't successful in it, but we're trying not to fly. So yeah, I think that's why we came to it. And I love France.
Did you actually then catch a ferry to the start?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, it's me, Bella from the show. I just wanted to let you know about something exciting. I have recently just created a new Facebook group named Seek Travel Ride, where if you are a fan of the show, you can join and we can actually bring this community more to life. It's a place where you can learn more about our guests, see more photos, chat about episodes in more detail, and maybe even pose some questions as well. It's also a place where you can share your own bicycle adventure journeys. Whether you've got a photo or a blog or some videos that you want to share, come online, say hi, join the Facebook group, and let's enjoy this community that we have built. We have a global audience here. People are listening from all around the world, and I think we can only thrive and get an even greater sense of wanderlust by sharing our experiences with each other and connecting. So get onto Facebook. I've provided a link in the show notes and you can join that community as well. Thank you. Now back to the show.
Yeah, so we took the ferry from Plymouth to Santander and then drove up the coast a little bit and San Sebastian. It was amazing. I was just saying, it like mitigates all those issues of flying a bike. The fact you can just like roll on half an hour before with your panniers. was pretty magical, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's such a nice way to start in that before we got on the ferry, we met this group of cyclists, and everyone was just exchanging stories of things they'd already done and where they were going. And there was just a real sense of community. And then going onto this 22-hour ferry, you just sort of bump into these newfound friends. And I mean, one guy we ended up staying in contact with, and he then told us all about his ride. Yeah, it was just amazing.
Actually, I must ask, was your ferry crossing nice and smooth? Like, was there seasickness involved, or was it plain sailing all the way to the landing?
Very lucky. I'm a travel sicker, and I was a bit nervous about that in the Bay of Biscay. No, it was like pancake flat. It was perfect. And I'd been at a wedding the night before, so I really needed that recovery time.
Yeah, I could just imagine. Interestingly enough, though, I had a similar experience on one of my first longer distance cycle tours in France. We did actually also catch the ferry from Dublin to Cherbourg up to the north in France. And there is just something totally different about riding your bike onto a ferry and then crossing the sea and then rolling down that sort of ferry ramp as well, which is quite cool too. I can vividly remember some of the other people on bikes that were on our ferry as well. Just hearing you talk about that, there is that sort of feeling like we're all about to start on this big adventure.
There's that sense of everyone's trip has been paused together to like recollect and just like slow things down, regroup. We actually were planning on using the ferry to plan a lot of our route, but the internet was sketchy and I was too hungover, so...
I'm just so thankful the seas were nice and smooth for you, because I could not imagine sitting on board a 22-hour ferry sailing slightly hungover with rough seas. I guess you could optimistically say things could only get better once you get on land if that was the case. So then you hinted there you were hoping to use that opportunity of almost a whole day on the ferry to plan the route, but that wasn't the case. So was your route planning up until that point pretty much just, what you'd read in this book?
Yes. So we'd read in the book and we had seen that it was this famous route and some mad people do it in 100 hours. We'd already decided that wasn't us and that we would take roughly 9 days, but we hadn't got a specific route, nor had we split it up. And I think, to be honest, I feel very fortunate that we hadn't, because I think we would have talked ourselves out of it. Because as soon as we did start day by day to plan the days, we suddenly realised quite a lot of climbing. And I think if we'd been in the UK looking at that, we might have thought, can our legs do it?
You say that, and I know I'm saying that as a resident of the Pyrenees. I moved here for these mountains, and I actually really like climbing, but I distinctly remember leaving on day one. And when you're on a road and you can sort of see the road a little bit up ahead of you and it pitches up a bit steeper, and in my mind I was like, oh man, that's not going to be fun. And then I had this moment where I'm like, Bella, you're about to cross a whole mountain range. There's going to be a lot worse than just that little steep pitch on the road up ahead. But I don't know what I was thinking, but it wasn't until I was there in the moment that that realization of what am I about to do sort of hit me as well. You were talking that on day one, you sort of had this realization. Was it, from my memory, leaving the Basque country, there weren't any long climbs, but I described it myself as roller coaster territory, in that you'd climb for a bit, descend for a bit, climb for a bit, descend for a bit. What was your perspective on day one?
I think roller coaster is a beautiful term for it. So we started in San Sebastian and cycled out. I kind of had like a hilarious exit because we cycled out and announced on our family WhatsApp, we're off. And then within 10 minutes, it turned out we had to get on another little ferry to get across a port.
I think port's a bit grand. We basically got to a kind of, I guess it was an estuary, where we thought there should be a bridge and there was no bridge. So I had this moment that went through my mind of, are we going to have to backtrack everywhere? And then we just see this tiny little passenger boat that takes you, probably costs 20 euros, but takes you about 5 meters. And that was the start.
We planned a route, so it was quite a main road down to where it all properly began. So we saw on our mapping app that there was maybe a nicer, slightly hillier route, which would take maybe double the amount of time, but might be much more beautiful. So we chose that. And I think that's when I realised what we'd bitten off, because it turned out it just wasn't at all It's a terrible cycle route. It was really steep, really hilly. And because we had back panniers on our bikes, it was so steep that the front wheels kept pitching off and tipping back. We were really struggling, having to like push our bikes up part of it. And both of us were like, oh God, we're never going to make it out of this town, let alone like across the Mediterranean.
This is sort of bringing back familiar memories for me. Hearing you talk about, the front wheel of the bike lifting off because you'd had so much in the back panniers. Like, let's backtrack just a little bit. What did you decide to take and what was your strategy for this? Because I can't recall whether you were camping on the route or whether you were going to be staying in accommodation the whole way. Like, what did you decide to bring with you?
We went for real minimalism. So we had one pannier each. We didn't camp. We made the executive decision early on that we wanted a nice bed and a warm shower. And we took very little, but even with that, on day 2, when we did then plan out the rest of the route and saw the gradients and the amount of climbing, we, courtesy of the French Postal Service, posted some things to the finish line. So after that, we had, say, one cycling outfit and one beautiful evening outfit for every day.
So what didn't make the cut then? What were those little luxurious extras that you were only going to be seeing at the finish line?
A pair of leggings, a pair of shorts. Mary got really bored of seeing me in the same outfit.
Yeah, I don't think, not many luxuries. Maybe some nail varnish.
We decided to stink it up a bit instead.
It's interesting that we talk about the things that you bring because so we did camp on our tour, and what that means is that the bike gets heavy real quick with stuff that you can't do without. Like you can't do without the tent, you can't do without the sleeping bag, you can't do without the sleeping mat. Our extra bit of luxury was we had a ground sheet tarpaulin and we actually bought a second one, which I guess is a luxury, but we did that because we'd had the experience of cycle touring before. And when you get to campgrounds, the one thing when you arrive as a biker or even a hiker is the lack of chairs. And you sort of get sick really quickly of just sitting on the muddy grass next to your tent. So we had an extra ground sheet. Our bikes, we didn't weigh them before we set off. We did weigh them when we got back. And both of us were sort of, I actually couldn't physically lift my bike up, which either says one of two things. It either talks about the fact that I really don't do weights or I just brought lots of stuff with me. So my bike weighed, I think it was 32 kilos, maybe 31 kilos, but that was without extra food and water as well. So, yeah, it was spicy.
To say, I'm just very impressed that you got up some of those climbs with that. We were always congratulating ourselves when we saw the very slim men, they were always men, like on these very expensive looking bikes sort of flashing past us. We were always just like, because our bikes are heavy and, we've got a pannier. But you guys with all that stuff, wow, that's something else.
The thing is, though, what it does is it forces me into a total different mindset. And maybe you were both the same as well. It's all relative, right? Whether you're one pannier or two panniers, all of a sudden you're slower than what you would be unencumbered without any luggage. And so because I knew that I was never going to be riding anything fast, it sort of then became more about the experience and living in that sort of each pedal turn at a time. And when I say each pedal turn at a time, I really mean that. I really want to talk about what I think was one of the first big cols of your trip, which was the Col du Tourmalet.
Oh, yeah.
I still think there's a part of my soul that's still by the roadside there because a part of Bella died on the Col du Tourmalet. And I had like 1,000-mile stare at every kilometre to go marker sign up until the summit with I think it went 11% average, 10% average, 13% average, 12% average. But whoever wrote that sign, scientifically, I feel they're screwed at their head because none of those averages were what my fancy trip computer were reading out to me.
What are the averages? No.
The only thing that stopped me getting off my bike and walking on the Mont Blanc was I actually didn't think I had the strength to push a loaded bike up the mountain because I was certainly cycling much slower than walking pace. Backtracking a bit, it forced me into a touring mindset. And I wanted to understand whether or not that was something that you both realised in yourselves as well.
I mean, I can speak for myself that whenever I do anything, I'm never about the speed, and it's all about where I'm going and what's around me. And I think probably we knew this about each other from those early cycles, because again, whilst everyone else was sort of going out into Kent, which is an area in England, super fast, Chloe and I were always there with a pannier each. We're talking for a 80k cycle with lots of food and provisions and extra layers just in case. So I think we always had that mindset rather than going super speedily.
For us, it's more about the joy and the experience than the act of completing, I think.
No, we like the completion.
We like the completion.
The speed of completion.
We joked before I press record about, rose-tinted glasses and type 2 fun, because I think a lot of that comes with reflecting back on the memories of taking a tour which involves so much climbing. But there's just some deep sense of satisfaction at looking back, thinking about those sort of things, isn't it? Like achieving something that you were both saying at the start, you didn't know what you were getting yourself into, and you were thankful because had you known, you might have talked yourself out of it.
I think especially in a world now where we all are so quick to get in a car, get on a train, get on a plane, where you can move between different places, cultures, societies so fast. It was really nice kind of just looking at Google Maps each night and be like, whoa, our legs have brought us here? Like, it's kind of cool to know that it's just you and, well, it's Mary who's fueled me here. It's cool and amazing to know what your body can do.
Yeah, and I think we always felt that when we got to the top of a col, and maybe there were some other people who had got their car up, and you could even see the cars sort of zigzagging up, and you go, they're having a hard time. And we just brought ourselves here. There was definitely a lot of, we just felt a lot of pride and self-congratulations.
You did mention there the idea of this trip was because you'd purchased a book and there were some amazing photos in it and you thought, wow, I want to experience that. Can you describe what those photos and images were?
Just those beautiful Pyrenees mountains. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time in the Alps, but not in the Pyrenees. And I think there is something so special about how they look, like that greenery, but also such epic landscapes. And also for us, I think what was really appealing was that idea of going from coast to coast, like that being that finish and that trajectory across the country. And going between two very different, being on the sea with different architecture around you and seeing as the landscape changes across the trip.
The climate and the trees and the plant and foliage and the smells.
I say this as someone who lives here, but it wasn't until I traversed and did this ride myself that it really hit home just how different those changes are. And sometimes they're a little bit sudden. But we were talking at the start, as soon as you leave the coast and you start heading east from the Atlantic, you're straight up a steep climb. But then all of a sudden, I remember vividly saying to my husband, probably within 30 minutes of the ride, you can't tell that we were anywhere near the sea. It's a rolling sort of hilly farmland, if that makes sense, with these looming peaks off in the distance. But then it's also the Basque Country. So you've got the typical whitewashed houses with the red terracotta tiles and the red shutters or the green shutters. And something I really loved was seeing the Basque Country signage of every village. So the signage is written in Basque and also in French, but all the French signs were like graffitied and spray painted out, which is sort of the pride of the Basque people. I don't know if you picked up on that as well.
Yeah, we absolutely did. We were surprised to see everything written in Basque at the beginning, and then nice to see how the culture felt about it in that area.
And also, conversely then, coming into the Mediterranean, I distinctly remember it was cresting the Col du Tourmalet, which was one of the last bigger climbs that we had on our trip. And it was almost immediate. It was like I just left and crossed into a different country. Like it was still French, but the scenery had changed remarkably. We were talking just before how you were saying captivated by that lush green mountain sort of scape. And that to me was very much the majority of the Pyrenees. But as soon as I got closer to the Mediterranean, the landscape changed and the trees were different, the smells were different. The architecture was certainly different. But even then, it was more a rocky sort of mountainous landscape. Did that strike you too as you got closer to the Med?
Definitely. And actually that was, I think, our last climb. And it was just amazing coming down, as you said, almost kind of the landscape changing to these deep gorges as the road wrapped around and more red brick houses. It was phenomenal. Really stunning.
I think the humidity and the heat also hit me at that point too. Suddenly it was cacti everywhere and it was way hotter, and I actually felt really grateful for the terrible weather that we'd had before. I think I would have really struggled if it had been that Mediterranean heat the whole way.
I think I took off 2 or 3 weeks after you had finished your trip, but I can tell you that the terrible weather you spoke about for the early part of your trip was the majority of what we had on ours. And whilst it wasn't physically raining for a lot of it, it was we had a lot of days where, you know, we were climbing mountains, but you couldn't see anything. Like I was riding in fog that was thicker than I felt safe to ride in multiple times, and that I normally would never choose to ride in, if that makes sense. I laugh, actually. My husband, he's got a couple of different sort of wet weather jackets and, you know, like a windbreaker jacket. He has one that's blue and he has one that's white. And I remember him saying, we laugh about this now, before the trip, he says, I'm going to take my white one because it'll be more visible. You're laughing because you know what I'm going to say. But in a whiteout fog, it's not, you can't see a thing. There were a few times where we joke about that really visible white jacket in the white fog. The Col du Tourmalet was probably the most white-out, eerie climb I've ever had. I still don't know what it looks like up there. I wasn't sure if I'd actually know if I'd gotten to the top before I'd start rolling down, because for the last 6.5 kilometres, it was white out. Did you have an experience of mountains in fog?
We were very lucky. Well, first of all, I can tell you the Col du Tourmalet is beautiful. So I'm sorry that you didn't get to see that.
You're going to have to send me some pictures.
Yeah, there was some beautiful snow on the mountains. I think we were lucky with fog. I'd say the foggiest day we had was actually when we saw you on the Tourmalet, which you could see everywhere. I feel we were very lucky, because if we'd had that, I'm not sure we would have kept on cycling through. We would have very much stopped at that point and waited for the fog to go.
We've had a summer of perpetual low cloud, rain and storms. When I met you both on the Tourmalet, it was actually another festivity taking place as well. So it was the procession of the géant, of the giant. For those who aren't aware, at the top of the Tourmalet is a big iron statue of Octave Lepise, who was the rider who first crossed the summit of the Tourmalet when it was in the Tour de France in 1910. And it's this massive structure, and it gets brought off the mountain just before winter because of all the snow that's there. Like the summit of the Tourmalet is metres under snow during winter. And then there's this big procession each year where the giant is brought up to the top in a truck. And that was the day that I bumped into you both, because you were oblivious to what was going on, weren't you?
Yeah, we just saw like a truck go past with a statue and like a brass band on the back, and like loads of people out. We're like, wow, God, the French and the Basque people, they're so active on a Saturday morning. Is it an exaggeration to say thousands of people out, or like 1,000 people? Like, it was loads.
I think there were thousands, definitely. It was definitely more than 1,000 for sure. It was funny. My neighbour, he was there as well. He was on his e-bike, and I can still look back at him cheerily going, "Bonjour, Bella," and then zooming away at 25 kilometres an hour. Well, I was on my gravel bike. I was not going 25 kilometres an hour. We had massive rainstorms that day. I think if I recall correctly, you both were lucky in that you missed the big storm that hit halfway up the summit, because you ducked in and had some pizza or something. Am I right?
We had, it wasn't pizza, but we did stop and have a little coffee and cake. Like I said, a leisurely approach. I think we'd learned from the day before, when we'd had an end of the world thunderstorm, that actually if you see shelter when the rain starts to come, it's a good idea to duck in, because it should pass.
You had coffee and cake on the way up. Please tell me, did you have some of the free cake and barbecue that was on offer at the top as well, as part of the festival?
Absolutely. Yeah, amazing.
They were handing out like free neck gaiters, like buffs as well. Did you each get one of those?
We needed it for the way down to keep us warm, to be honest. It was gorgeous little orange buff.
A little memento from that day. I must say, and I know I'm going on a side shoot here, because it was a barbecue, and as an Australian, I obviously barbecues have a special place in my heart. And I don't want to come across as not being thankful for free food, because when you've cycled up the Tourmalet and someone gives you some cake and some sausage and bread, I was very, very thankful. But some fried onions on the barbecue and a little bit of sauce wouldn't have gone astray.
I think I was just really pleased to get anything. I was like, hot food in a wet rain cloud. This is ideal.
Let's talk about day before then, actually, because that was the day you did the Murray Blanc.
Yes.
And if I've got this right, you did it all bisque and Salor on the same day. That is mega. So our days were different in that I did the Murray Blanc not the same day as all bisque and Salor. So I want to hear about the Murray Blanc. Would have been your first serious proper col, right?
Yeah. And that was a baptism of fire. I don't know whether it was the same for you. We arrived at the bottom and there was a sign saying shut or road closed. And so I spoke to a local cyclist and he's like, no, not until the middle of June. So off we go, we cycle up the beginning bit. I mean, also to caveat, at this stage, we had no idea about what gradients were. So when we looked at the sign, it said 8%, 10%, 12%, not a clue. And so we start it feels really nice, beautiful sun. And then as we're getting to the steeper sections you mentioned earlier, we stop to have a drink of water and a bite to eat. And as I'm going off to cycle, I noticed that my cleat has left a mark on the road. And so we're like, what is going on? And then we realise we go a little bit further and there's a roller going up and down the road because they were resurfacing the whole thing for the Tour de France. So as we were doing the final sort of 3-4 kilometres, our bike was slightly sinking into the ground, leaving tyre tracks as they were setting this new road.
And they're there now. I've seen them. I've seen them.
It was an encouraging love message to you. You can do it. Keep going.
I nearly rolled off that road. I think it was with 2 kilometres to go. And it was pure hell for me. But I was going so slow. I cannot pronounce how slow I was going. I was surprised that I was able to stay upright at that snail pace of a speed. And I don't know if you've had this phenomenon before, but where sometimes when you're going so slow, your handlebars sort of turn a little bit, which isn't great either. And like my handlebars made a little turn. It was hard to keep my balance. And I nearly rolled off into the gutter at that point. And I swear to God, had I done that, I would have stayed there. Like that was my resting place. The other thing that I remember, so you were saying how you had no idea about gradients. Well, I wish I had that. Because I did, and I stupidly had Googled the climb beforehand. I had never ridden it before, but I knew its reputation preceded it. And I don't know what website I read, but it was definitely wrong. But it had said that the last kilometre was 7%, and I thought 7%, that's pretty manageable. So the last 4 kilometres of Murray Blanc are spicy, double digits, unrelenting. There is no backing off either. It's not like it's double digits for 100 metres and then you can catch your breath and then it's steep again. It's just never ending, it feels like. And I had read that the last kilometre was going to be nice. So when I got to that last kilometre sign and saw that it wasn't 7%, it was actually 12%, which means that for a kilometre you're going to ride and it's going to be 120 metres of elevation. I said words that are not G-rated for the podcast. The funny thing is, I took a video then of my husband arriving and he's like posting letters up the climb, like riding side to side to take the gradient out. And you could see that he looks at the sign and it's like he's had a double take. And then in the video, and then he says, I thought it was meant to be 7.
I'd like to watch that video.
Again, rose-tinted glasses now. Mind you, what I will say, as hard as that climb was to cycle up, I would have hated to come down that with my pannier load. I don't know, what are you both like climbing and descending? Like, do you live for the downhills or do you prefer the uphills? How do you both balance that?
So we did choose a strange route because neither of us really like downhill. We're both terrified.
So then could you imagine having to ride down that?
Yeah, I think that would have been torture. I think we both very much prefer the uphills and a nice, I love a leisurely gradient downhill, but anything more than that.
Anything more than like 5% we don't like.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to remember what the steepest downhill was. There weren't too many nasty... Well, actually, Tourmalet's got some steep downhills, but we couldn't see it on our ride because we had a whiteout. What was it like descending Tourmalet that day that I did meet you?
I think
We were racing the rain, weren't we?
we were racing the rain, and also we'd done some steeper, sort of smaller sections that were far steeper on our first day. So again, I think after that, the Tourmalet felt okay, even though actually there were some pretty hard gradients. Although that said, I do remember us having to stop a lot of times because our hands were so sore from braking.
Claw hands.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Because, and I say this knowing that you're coming from the UK, and the UK isn't known for having very long, very steep climbs. Like, you've got some very steep climbs in the UK that have some very spicy gradients, but they're not 18 kilometres long, if that makes sense. So, and you're not descending that long in the breaks either. So it takes some getting used to. I think also the good thing with the Tourmalet descent, whilst it is long and steep, is it's almost like a main road in a way. It is beautiful and scenic, and it's an amazing mountain, and it's an amazing one to experience. But to me, the real beauty in the Pyrenees are the smaller roads. Does that resonate with you both as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think then you can just sort of settle into it. Some of my favourite cols were the much smaller ones on the smaller roads where like Mary and I could cycle side by side and chat on the less steep bits and take in the scenery, and you're not having to dodge cars. You feel like you've got the whole mountain to yourself.
I do think actually overall, apart from a few sections, we didn't find there was too much traffic. That was such a pleasure. Whereas cycling around the UK, often you'll just constantly have cars on your tail, which can become pretty tedious.
And I feel like the French have like a real respect for cyclists that maybe not everyone in the UK does. So it's sort of celebrated, and people see you and give you the space and tend to be much more respectful with overtaking and recognising how not to scare you. Where in the UK, there's a bit of like a cyclist versus car standoff still.
In France, if someone's shouting to you from a car, they're generally wishing you bon courage.
Yeah.
Did you experience that as well? Like just some strangers randomly cheering you on every now and then?
Yes, a lot of times. It was really lovely. There's a lot of encouragement from cars, but also other cyclists. It was just, we always had a really nice vibe. I don't think there was any moment that we didn't have that from others.
I guess the only one that we had maybe slightly is there is a rivalry between motorcyclists and cyclists. Mm. We had like whole packs of predominantly men of like 8, 10, 12, 14 motorcycles coming past. And it was really hard to know whether you were going to get like a thumbs up and a cheer or like just a race past. But I think maybe that's like a historic battle of the roads.
Col du Tourmalet, which I loved, by the way, and I've ridden the Tourmalet many, many times before, but always from the other approach, like via the Soleure first. And actually, that whole side there, I might just say, in the Cirque de la Tour, the balcony road there is amazing. It's probably one of my most favourite roads in the Pyrenees. But the other side of the Tourmalet, it was my first time climbing it. I loved it, absolutely loved the scenery there. I realised I probably had a sunny day, and I don't think you both did. It was the climb that I really noticed the motorbikes the most.
I think that road we were okay, but you're right, we didn't have the sunshine. That was fortunately our one and only, whilst we were cycling, end of the world thunderstorm. The one time on our trip we really considered hitchhiking, and we did make a tiny effort, but fortunately the mountain rescue came past and just put their thumbs up at us, and we thought, well, if they're not worried about us, then we should be okay. And
you're telling me you could have skipped out on the Tourmalet had the mountain rescue actually rescued you. I love that. That's very French. No, courage, you can keep on going.
They absolutely weren't worried.
The thunderstorms, they just hit harder in these mountains. Was there actual thunder involved? Because it booms. When we have thunder here and I'm at home, like our whole house shakes. And I might add, whilst the home is 300 years old, the walls are 80, 90 centimetres thick. It's not going anywhere. But you just feel everything move. Did you experience thunder on the Tourmalet?
Yeah, so it's one of the classic things where we just had lunch and we're climbing out and we just like slathered ourselves in sun cream because it was so hot and sunny. And then about 20 minutes later, we found ourselves in like an end of the world rain. Like the road had turned into a river and like pieces of wood were going past us. And we were sheltering under a tree and our raincoats were no longer waterproof. We had to do a full dress change afterwards. I'd looked up on our weather app and it said it was going to keep going for 4 more hours. And we'd already done the Morée Blanche that morning, and so we were pretty tired, and we were like, that's going to be until like darkness basically. We've still got a massive ride to go, so we've got to get off this mountain somehow. So that's when we started hitchhiking. And luckily Mary met a lovely man who was very reassuring.
He was like a prophet for us. he had this white van. I stopped him. I asked whether he had any space. He didn't. He had machinery in the bag. But he just says to me in French, "There's some shelter up on the right, and the storm will pass." And he couldn't have told us 2 wiser things. We were able to find this little doorway where we could change, have a little almond croissant, and then another, 20 minutes later, the storm was gone, and off we could ride and finish our day.
And actually, when you talk about almond croissants, I need to give you a special shout out there, because you did. Listeners, I had the benefits of getting lots of top touring tips from both Mary and Chloe before Stephen and myself set off on this same adventure. And one of the things you did mention was the Boulangerie in La Ronde, which is the town at the base of the Aubisque. So I too had some little pastries in my back pocket for that climb, thanks to the local knowledge that preceded me beforehand.
It was our best boulangerie that we found, I think.
So my best croissants, and can this be a Seek Travel Ride podcast without discussion of food? Absolutely not. So we're going to discuss it now. My best croissants were actually had closer to the Mediterranean, off the descent of the Col du Tourmalet, just before there's the town of Prades. And it was a small village before there. And the boulangerie had a big sign, and it was blowing like anything, the wind. The sign was actually being held down, like it was a massive, like 3-4 meter sign tied down with rope with bricks on it. But the wind was so strong that the bricks were actually coming off the ground. It was quite interesting. But the boulangerie was under a new ownership, and I was like, oh, I wonder how this will be. But I had to stop because it was the first open boulangerie that we actually came across in 2.5 days on this route. Like the route that we took I just felt we were so remote. There were no villages with boulangeries. Like it astounded me. It's not a given that each village is going to have somewhere where you can have a croissant fix, but they were the best croissants of the trip.
I've got 2 things about that. Is first of all, I know it's so surprising when you come across a town or a village that doesn't have a mairie and a boulangerie, because I feel that most places in France do. But we also sounds like that last bit, we did a similar route. And actually one of the things we were saying before this was it was so nice being so remote, and apart from when you got hungry, actually being completely in the wilderness and very self-sufficient. Whereas earlier on in the trip, we had relied too heavily on the boulangeries, to the point that I didn't think I'd ever say it, but got bored of croissants.
Oh, see, that's where you just need to change tack and go to something different. Hannah Raisin, that's a favourite of my husband. He thinks it's better value for money, and you've got some good cycling fuel there with a few sultanas as well mixed in. Which I guess there's validity to that point. But I do get what you mean. Like sometimes when you say you relied on them too heavily, you get to a point where you just do not want another baguette with ham and cheese on it as well.
I think that we should have done more of those baguettes. I'd say for the first, initially we just didn't have enough snacks at all. And Chloe, on our first day, Chloe went into this little supermarket and comes out with a tiny bag of sort of sultanas and nuts and a few quite dried biscuits. I mean, biscuits are dry, but not an appetizing look of biscuits. And we thought, these would be our emergency snacks. Literally did the first few hours and then came across Boulangerie and changed our tack pretty fast. And then from then, say, ate a good 5 pastries a day for the first couple of days. And after that, realised you need the baguettes.
Definitely. Actually, I think we set a record because we were camping. So we had camp pasta every night. Every single night we had pasta. I don't think I've had pasta so many successive nights in a row, but every night that's all we wanted. And when I say camp pasta, there was nothing fancy here. Every now and then there might have been some sort of meat through it, but it was pretty much pasta sauce, and vegetables, because it's the one thing I normally crave in a trip that's a bit hard to get by when you're cooking for yourself or something, or you're not cooking, if that makes sense, is like vegetables at lunchtime and something. I really miss eating those on a cycle tour. So there was always veggies in our camp pasta. When you talk about the remoteness, I loved the remote wild savageness of that section of the Pyrenees, but we definitely had some problems with food and refueling there, and water as well. There's normally a tip I give to people when they're touring in France is if you're looking for water somewhere and you can't find anywhere like a store or a water fountain, is look for a cemetery, because there's always a tap at a cemetery. But people obviously aren't even laid to rest in this part of the Pyrenees, because I didn't see cemeteries either.
That's true.
But we had some bad days in terms of not refueling enough, for sure. And again, I live here. I just took it as a given that we would be going through places regularly enough where we could resupply, but that was certainly not the case.
Yeah, I think so. I've done one other long cycle trip before across France, and I remember having a couple of sections on that where I almost gave up and just lay on the side of the road and thought, I'll just wait here and someone will come and get me. And so I think because of those experiences, when we were looking ahead at stages, that is the one bit of planning we did the night before, was we'd kind of look and just try and get a sense of what was around, like restaurants, boulangeries, and if there was nothing. I mean, that morning, I think that final section, we went to the boulangerie and we had a lot of French people laughing at the amount we were buying. And actually we ate every bit of it. And I suppose with the water, my tip is if you can't find anything, knock on someone's door and they'll give you some.
Yeah, although, and maybe our routes were slightly different, but there were places where there were no doors to knock on, or these doors had people living in them 50 years ago, but we had a lot of ghost town villages. I remember, and with like really grand buildings where nobody lives anymore. And I was thinking, what happened here so many years ago, where there was one building that sticks out in my mind. It had 27 windows on the front facade, and it was beautiful, and it was not, overrun. The roof was not in bad repair or anything. It wasn't overtaken by ivy. It was not in pristine condition, but you could clearly see that in the 50s, something amazing was happening here. But now it was empty. And so there were times where it was like, there is no one here. There is an old Qatar castle ruin up on that mountain peak, and I can see that the Qatars could have had a lot of solace here because it was beautiful and remote. But I ended up actually at a village. There was a restaurant on the last day. It was boiling hot, and I didn't want to actually stop and have a sit-down meal because I didn't want to have an hour and a half in the sun and then an extra hour and a half of extra heat to get to the coast. But I did ask for water bottle top-ups there, and the proprietor, was so beautiful. She took our biddens and she even put some lovely ice from the drinks in them as well. That was golden.
I think it's those moments also that really make the cycle. We had a quite similar but different experience in that it was raining, but we got to one of our accommodations and the guy had cancelled it without letting us know. And so it was actually after the Tourmalet, and we'd not been planning to do another one after that. And we went to a little cafe just nearby to regroup ourselves. And because at that point we decided to do the next col, one of our favourite, Col d'Aspin. And I said to the guy that this just happened, and he was just so lovely. He was like, come in, you guys need a coffee, you need some cake. He was serving a lunch for all his friends, and they wanted us to join them at the table and tell them what we'd been doing. And it's just those moments when you meet people, like when we met and chatted, and this cafe owner and others on the trip, that really, I just love that connection that I think only these kind of experiences often bring you, that these people that you'd never otherwise meet, and their generosity and kindness, it's incredible. And I think in a world where everything can be quite bleak, it really restores that faith in humanity.
Massively. And you're so right. It's almost like their goodwill. It's like when someone in a car or on a bike says, bon courage. It's what you would generally say to someone with, when you're wishing someone well, but also in French, it's like good luck. And you're sort of thinking, what do they know that I don't to get up this mountain? But honestly, it does give you this lift. Like when someone actually just takes a moment to cheer you on, like I don't know about you, but maybe my speed doesn't go up, but mentally it does. It really perks me up. I was also just thinking quickly when you were saying about the people in the boulangerie laughing about all the food you were ordering and not struggling getting through it. We had a similar experience at a cafe. It was actually at the foot of the Col du Tourmalet, which is after the Tourmalet, which is where you would have been invited and ushered into for your trip, because you had told me about where you had gone to stop, and I had gone there, but it wasn't open. So, but I went next door and they had a sign. It was 6 crepes for €6, and I went there and I said, we had descended the Tourmalet, assuming we could, because we knew this area, assuming we'll get some food at the boulangerie at the base in Marie Saint-Campin. But we got there in the middle of the afternoon, so the boulangerie was closed. So we had to go up over the Aspin and had no food. And we were like, great, what are we going to do? I think we had some peanuts. So similar to your experience of eating like your small, pitiful rations from the supermarket. But we got to the base of 5Ks to go from Col du Tourmalet, which is at Paol, and I ordered 6 crepes for me, 6 crepes for my husband, and the ladies were sort of laughing about us having them. I'm sure it's definitely not the first time they've seen cyclists smash crepes. I inhaled them like they did not exist like 10 minutes after they were put in front of me. But I think it got me up the climb. It was amazing.
Fueled by delicious French boulangeries and crepes.
Powered by pastry.
Cheese and ham and wine. I mean, just all the best things.
Yeah, there were definitely a couple of times where we would have, bear in mind we're camping here, I'd go to a supermarket to do our pasta shop, but also get like, what beer do they have that's cold? And actually, one top tip for those of us who enjoy a drink, if you get to a supermarket and you're camping and there are no cold drinks available in France, what you need to do first and foremost when you enter the supermarket is get your said drink of choice, put it in the deep freezer behind a packet of frozen vegetables, do your shop, and then before you get to the checkouts, go and get your cold drink, and you can thank me later at the campsite.
So that probably works when you're not on a cycle as well. Just a general life hack, that.
There you go. Top tips coming from me, whether you're touring or not.
Bella, I'm curious to know how camping after these massive days, because we had the luxury of like a bed, and I just can't really imagine setting up a tent in these storms. What was that like?
So there were 2 days where we had rain greeting us at the campsite. So the first day was the day coming to the coast. We hadn't started the traverse. We'd started the actual ride to get to the start line, if that makes sense. Similar to you catching the ferry, we just rode our bikes for an extra day. And we caught a train for part of that trip, for more than we had planned to catch, actually, because we had biblical thunderstorms. But we got to camp, and to be fair, we weren't setting up in the rain, but we did set up in the rain the day that we went up and over the Col du Tourmalet. That was a really small campground. And actually, I remember going, and the thing that really sits starkly in my mind was we descended the Tourmalet, absolutely frozen in a white-out fog, and then to get to the campground was slightly off our route, but it was the only campground available. And it involved 200 metres of climbing to get to it. And we were both so thankful for the climbing, despite how tired we are. We had 3 cols that day. Pyres was quite a big one, but it just warmed us up. But we arrived there, and whilst I think it was 6:30 or 7 at night, and it's summertime here, right? So, long summer daylight hours into the nights. But it may as well have been 11. Like, it was so dark. And we had thunder and lightning booming all around us. So that was the only time where we set up camp and pretty much just stayed in our sleeping bag the whole night. And I remember I had to give myself a pep talk to want to go out to the toilet before I went to sleep for the night, because that was not great. And it poured with rain all night long. But then in the morning it had sort of cleared a bit, which was fine. And so we were fortunate in that whilst we had some nights where it rained, we didn't have to pack up and unpack a wet tent on consecutive days. Look, it would have been great every now and then to just thought we're just rolling into accommodation. We can get into a hot shower, the water is going to be piping hot. I don't have to set up a tent. I don't have to sit on a tarp on the ground. If I'd had that experience, it would have been amazing. But conversely, there's something really beautiful about stripping back to basics and realising just how simple things can be. The one thing we definitely underestimated was just how long it takes to pack up and get going each day. It's not so much that we faffed around too much, but we did not have many early starts, if that makes sense. And I don't know how, like, what time were you setting off each morning?
Really varied depending on the, sorry to rub it in, hotel breakfast.
Rub it in. I want to know, what was the best breakfast you had? I need to know this.
I think at the end, actually, at the end, we treated ourselves and booked into a nice-ish hotel, and their breakfast was pretty phenomenal. Especially, and also at that point, we had time to spend as long as we wanted there because we didn't have to go off and cycle. So we'd really, get it there.
Get early doors and stay the entirety of the buffet hours.
Our last day, we planned what we thought would just be a nice roll down into, where did we end up? Argelès-sur-Mer. And
that's where we ended up as well.
And unfortunately, so it was just about a 60-kilometre cycle, but we set off in the afternoon because we had a lovely morning near Prad, and then it was relentless heat and a headwind like nothing we had experienced before. So it felt like we were permanently climbing uphill. And I'd say the only highlight of that ride was the ice cream we had.
And sometimes it's something like an ice cream which needs to motivate you as well on that. I think our route varied slightly differently because our final day, you have this perspective that you reach the coast and it's flat then, and you have this flat run into the coast. We did not have that on our final day. We still had 3 climbs to do on the final day. So we left Prades, and then we did the last big climb was the Col du Tourmalet, which goes over 1,000 meters. And the Palomar climb is beautiful, but I was just not with it. I was really deflated on that last day, and we had incessant heat, and we had a headwind, and the downhill, we climbed for ages up the Col du Tourmalet. And normally, as you both know, you ride uphill for ages, you ride downhill for ages. So you sort of get a bit of an understanding, well, we're going uphill for a bit, but there'll be a long descent. And we had it in mind that we should have a long descent, but we didn't. And each time the descent sort of went down in steps, and then you had to do another col. So there was another climb and another climb. And they weren't hard climbs compared to what we had done, but I think coming on the last day and in the heat and with no water, it almost finished us as well.
I'm really pleased to hear that because we decided not to do those climbs. We went for the short route, and when we got to the coast, we did wonder, would it be better if we'd gone for the mountainous route? So it's good to hear that maybe actually at that point with the heat and the headwinds, neither was ideal.
And see, that's where when I was talking about the remote section as well, because we went through some beautiful, beautiful villages, but there was nothing there. We struggled. It was so hot, and we both ran out of water on the climb, and there was nowhere to refill bottles. So you took the flat route, but flat headwinds, I don't know what's better, whether flat headwinds or uphill with maybe not as much headwind. I feel like they sort of balance each other out.
I think also we had seen it as like an easy last day, and we're like ready to get out of the saddle, and so had just like woefully underprepared for that final bit. We thought we were done, and I think that was also like our dismay that we really weren't.
And it honestly felt like we were cycling uphill all the way.
What was the traffic like as you got closer to the coast?
So the initial route we had planned actually for the last 2 days were all on national routes, and we hadn't realised that. And our third to last day, we had some sections on one of the national routes, and we quickly realised that we did not want to spend the rest of our trip on them. That's when we did a big reroute, and I'm so pleased that we did. So fortunately, on the last day, we didn't have that much on the national route, which would have been horrific. But it did mean we did a little gravel section and maybe didn't go the most linear way. But it wasn't too trafficky, fortunately, because that would have been miserable. The time we spent on those big roads, it was just scary. It was so unenjoyable.
It's contrary to why you're doing the traverse across the Pyrenees. We were talking about, when you first read that book and you saw those pictures and it was lush green mountains, small rural areas. It's not the commercialised Alps, which have got more rocky, rugged peaks. You're on small, quiet roads, discovering places, not places time forgot, but there's definitely a rural, familial feel about the Pyrenees. As you get closer to the coast, you realise it's like anywhere in Europe or anywhere, even in Australia or, around the world. As soon as you get close proximity to a coastal area, it's like the population grows, and so there's much more unpleasant traffic there too. When you were talking about your route and how you changed that dramatically, I think you made a decision to deviate away and not do the climb to Puy-Marin, and that's when you decided to go up and over the Col du Tourmalet, I think. That's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Best decision we made. It was probably our favourite day. And I couldn't believe that the traditional route goes down those huge roads. And so I think that's why we hadn't considered it, because we just presumed that it would all be the same as what we'd already had.
What I should point out here actually is, if people are interested in traversing the Pyrenees and the Raid Pyrenees, you mentioned at the start how some crazy people can do the challenge, and there is an official challenge with stamped brevet cards at certain points to do the route in less than 100 hours, and power to people who do that. There is, though, another route, which is the Raid Pyrenees touring route. Now, the touring route is longer and involves more climbs. So what you actually deviated onto, really, was the touring route, because the 100-hour route takes the main road and does the Puy-Marin, and the touring route diverts off that and does more climbs instead, which is what you chose instead. And it was interesting for the whole trip. It was awesome, actually. My husband's uncle did this Raid Pyrenees route. He did the 100-hour route 30 odd years ago. And so he was getting the benefit of living these nostalgic, great memories for him by our ride. And so each morning it was like our own personal cheer squad saying, yay, you're going to be doing this climb soon. And, I had memories of this. And it was quite cool thinking that our trip was reliving some happy memories and experiences for him and reminding him of those times too. But when we arrived at Tarascon-sur-Ariège for our night, and that's where the 100-hour route goes on that main road and goes between Tarascon and Aix-les-Thermes and then up the Puy-Marin. And so he was saying, you've only got one big climb left. It's the Puy-Marin and it's on a really busy road. And he sent us a photo and you could see a trail of cars behind him. And we knew we weren't on that because we were always taking the touring route. So you obviously weren't aware that there were two different routes or options when you took off then?
I think we were, but maybe hadn't done enough research. The book didn't tell us about the second one.
I definitely remember seeing two topographies where you can see the outline of the different climbs and seeing the raid and the touring route. And as you say, I think in the end we did a little bit of a mixture of both of them.
The raid official route is 100 hours, and from memory, I'm not going to get the exact distance, but it's about 700 or 710 kilometres or so, and it's about 11,000 metres of climbing, whereas the touring route, they give you 10 days to complete. So there's a hint there in how much harder it is. So it's about 800 kilometres, and it has 18,500 metres of climbing. So you do a lot more climbs. And like yourselves, we didn't do either route entirely. We mainly did the touring route, and what differed off ours was just a couple of points where we slightly deviated and did some different cols instead. Personally, I love the route we chose, and I love the touring route. Yeah, it was harder and there was more climbing, but it was generally much more quieter. And those end roads you were talking about, they're horrible to cycle on. Why would you choose to do it?
Yeah, never. That would be the one thing I'd look at in the future. I suppose one tip would be really look at what the roads are like, because it's not always apparent when you're plotting it actually how busy a road is. It's just so miserable and scary.
I think this can happen though sometimes. When you're doing any sort of adventure where there's like quite a set start and finish. So for us, it was Atlantic to Mediterranean. So you kind of sometimes, when you have such a rigid end point, then you do have like that transfer time where you're having to like do a bit of a slog to get to that end destination. And that's what it felt like. It was that last day was just like, we've done all the beautiful bits. We've just got to keep going. But yeah, because we even thought when we couldn't really find another route, which wasn't going to just be those massive national routes. And so we even started looking at trains and stuff because we were like, this is grim, it's dangerous, it's really not enjoyable, this is our holiday. But we also then had a powwow where we were like, but we really want to have travelled the whole way. So, yeah, then it felt like we were copping out.
Yeah. Well, I definitely will say, like, our last day, whilst it was longer to yours and it did go the hilly way, what I will say was the hilly way was very quiet. The roads were quite quiet as well. There's not a lot of services there, so if you take that option, make sure you got lots of food and water with you on board. But the last, if I hazard a guess, 20 or 30 kilometres, you're on the Eurovelo 8, which leads you all the way to Argelès-sur-Mer, and it's on a separated cycle path. So you would have been on that path as well, leading into Argelès-sur-Mer?
I don't think we were.
Oh, no.
No, that doesn't seem like our experience. Our experience, actually, probably it was our greatest low of the entire trip, was it was like so hot and windy and dusty. And we suddenly like cycled over this river. So we both like immediately put the brakes on and like, we need a swim now. I'd actually had a massive sense of hemophilia. And so we decided we needed like an immediate swim. So like turned our bikes around and like hid them in the bushes and took our panniers down and swam in this like really, I mean, we passed through phenomenal scenery on this trip, but this river was really quite grim actually. And it was like very shallow, and it was the swim when you just like need to submerge yourself. It's like a visceral need. So got in this really quite disgusting water and had a really quite average swim. And it was only when we were getting it, we realised that it was like swamp territory filled with mosquitoes. And we got absolutely like ravaged while we were trying to put our clothes back on and get dressed. And as you can imagine, it like the sense of haemophilia did not improve.
Oh, no. Like you could just, I'm just trying to think of what the equivalent is. You know, we were talking about ice cream before and how you anticipate it sometimes like you just need it. I remember last year buying an ice cream on a hot day and then going to take it out of the wrapper and the stick came off. But getting into a river, I'm just thinking, were you able to even submerge yourself? Like I'm picturing now, you've talked about this horrible river. Like was it like reeds and it was so like did you have to just sit down in it and were you even then covered?
Yeah, there was like lying in a puddle.
As cars see from the road in this weird river.
Quite muddy.
We sort of cycled a little bit down the road and then Chloe suddenly goes, I don't know if I've got my passport. We must go back just in case I haven't got my passport. Luckily, we just stopped, we regrouped, she had her passport, and on we went again into the miserable headwind. I think also the worst thing is when it's so bright, you can't look at the way you're going on your phone. And so we just had this combination of permanently getting lost. We refound our humour when we got to the sea and finally went for a dunk and realised we'd finished. And then the whole miserable day of heat and wind was forgotten.
Melted away.
So that moment, where did you first spot the sea from, actually? I know, obviously, when you're arriving at the sea, you see the sea, but can you remember when you first saw it, actually, like, far out on the horizon?
No, I was seeing too much red. I can't remember it.
Because, and maybe this is different weather, but from the top of the Col du Tourmalet, which I know you both did, we actually spotted the Mediterranean there. And we weren't 100% sure if the sea was what we were looking at, but we were sort of fairly confident. And when we got to the campground at Prades that evening, I asked the lady as I was checking in and telling her what we did. And she goes, yes, no, you can see the sea from the top of the Tourmalet. And I was like, oh my gosh, I remember getting goosebumps then. The last day at the top of the final big climb, the over 1,000-metre climb, the Col du Tourmalet, you sort of descended about 500 metres and then we came to a stop because we could really see the sea. And that was amazing. And then the mood went much lower when our descent turned into climbs and heat and no water. So we didn't have the river experience. We had the, I don't have enough water to get me to the end experience. But I'm sort of a bit sad, though, that you didn't get to experience, like, even coming into Argelès-sur-Mer on the cycleway, because I have a love-hate relationship with some cycle infrastructure, especially some of the Eurovelo routes, because I feel whilst they're really nice and safe and separated, and that's brilliant, and there's lots to be said for that, sometimes they're really horrible in terms of feeling like you're just not making any progress. Like you take these big, long deviations to get you to the same point, just to sometimes to avoid like 50 metres of a road, if that makes sense. But the Eurovelo route all the way into Argelès-sur-Mer was amazing. I don't want to rub it in because we certainly had different high and low moments, let's put it that way, and we had different weather, but we had a tailwind. It was nice. It was hot. It was a hot tailwind, and it was also our first spotting of actual grapevines, which was interesting. It was only then that I realised I hadn't seen grapes for the entire trip, and you can't go to many sections of France and not see a vineyard. And it occurred to me that I'd nearly crossed an entire mountain range without seeing a winery.
Yeah, that is true. I'm just still thinking about how different our experiences were and how torturous it is to hear you say that with the tailwind and the beautiful cycleway.
We did have a lot of climbing on that last day, though. So, pluses and minuses, if that makes sense. Because I can look back on it and think we had the last 20 or 30 Ks was on the cycleway. I can't remember, was it 20 or 30? La Bellou or something? I feel bad for not remembering the name of this village, but I swear I was energy depleted and had the 1,000-mile step. I needed food like hours ago, and we diverted off our route to go to a big supermarket and sat down, and I sculled a can of Orangina and had some food there. And I have this uncanny ability of feeling my worst on a bike on the flattest of terrain. So I can go up and over mountains okay, but if you say, Bella, today you're cycling 30 kilometres on a dead flat path, all of a sudden I have no energy. That was my experience. So I can look back with the lovely rose glasses now and tell you we had a tailwind and we were on separated roads and it was brilliant. But actually at the time, I was really struggling. Tell me, what was it like actually arriving and getting into the Mediterranean Sea? And I'm sure you must have had a dunk. What was it like having that swim?
It was glorious because we'd swum most days across the Pyrenees. Maybe that's not quite true, but obviously it'd been fresh water, then suddenly being all salty, and there's an amazing sunset, and then we had dinner on the beach. It felt quite surreal, oh, surely we're getting on our bikes tomorrow and just continuing. This is just another nice pit stop. No, it's really magic.
Yeah, incredible swim. Just ideal.
And actually, if you were having river swims coming up to it, you must have noticed that the water was warm in the sea.
Oh, yeah. A little bit warmer than it's really very chilly lake.
You're not at the seaside in Kent anymore. I think it was 23 degrees. I remember actually seeing that. The water temperature was 23 degrees.
Yeah.
That was a few weeks later, but it probably would have been quite similar, actually.
I don't remember it being uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think our comparison is very cold water. But no, it was beautiful. And as Chloe said, it was the grace of having such a hot day is that we had one of the most phenomenal sunsets that I've ever seen in my life, with the mountains, and there was some cloud coming in, so we have the lights of dispersing through. It was just absolutely sensational.
Quite like Renaissance painting-esque.
Yeah.
I remember we watched the sunset, and I think there was a full moon as well, so that was pretty epic. You told me you booked into a hotel and you enjoyed some amazing food. I'm imagining you had a nice celebratory drink as well.
We did. And actually, quite hilariously, we went to a local French festival the night after. So actually, that first night, we had a really beautiful dinner by the sea, very picturesque, amazing seafood. And then the next night, we found out there was this little local music festival in a vineyard. So we took ourselves there. Thought we actually got back on our bikes in the evening to pedal up to this festival, and it was the funniest experience ever. In that there was a thunderstorm there, and everyone was. I mean, we're used to English festivals where it rains a lot, so people are just very used to that. Whereas here, the rain came and there wasn't that much shelter, but people were being very resourceful, hiding under bins. And then we managed to see a band that we don't know, but were very iconic in the 80s. So that was a good celebration, and we felt we were really experiencing the local vibes.
That is awesome. It's ending the trip on a high note with, and the weather having a say in it still to the last day. I love that too.
Exactly. Nature will do what it wants to do.
So I guess then, reflecting back, you both now can look at a map and have this experience where you go, wow, I went from the one side. I went coast to coast, but not just coast to coast on the bike. You went coast to coast over a mountain range. What's the biggest takeaway that you've got reflecting back on that?
I think coming back full circle to a comment Chloe made near the beginning was that it's just amazing what you can do if you set your mind to it and you look at things positively. Like even those times that were awful, I think we're very fortunate that together we always have one of us. To date, I don't think there's been a time where both of us have been on a real low, or if it has, one of us has always been like, no, we're fine, let's keep going. And so I think that optimism, a bit of stubbornness, that mindset, and actually you can just do some really cool, fun things. And I feel very lucky that they're the things I enjoy, that getting out there and going on these adventures just brings me so much pleasure.
What about you then, Chloe? Come on.
Yeah, I guess, or just like anything's achievable if you put it into bite-sized chunks. So like when things were quite difficult, we broke it initially down into like hour chunks and then into half an hour chunks and then into 15-minute chunks of like, you just need to get through the next 15 minutes. And if you just kind of like put your mind to it and bite things down, then actually it's amazing what your body and your mind can do. And it's, given us like I hope the courage to go off and see other cool adventures, and just because we're not pro athletes doesn't mean you can't go and try things out.
Absolutely. And I have to say, it resonates with me. It took a while for me to believe I'd done it, if that makes sense. Have you found that having a week of descending with the climbing, did you find that you got used to it and it wasn't as scary as it might have been from day one?
Definitely. I actually went on a cycle today, and I know that descents I would have before been petrified on, I was okay with. I still would love some disc brakes. That's the next step. But yes. And I think also, although we are scared of the descents, like even with the ascents, knowing that actually if you break those down, you can just keep going.
Definitely. And it's always okay to stop if you need to as well. Like there's nothing breaking it down into chunks. I just need to get to there. I just need to get to there. Rather than this big, long journey, just manageable things as well. I think that's pretty cool too. So do you both think you would take on another big cycle adventure?
Yeah, definitely. I haven't got one quite in the pipeline yet, but
it's working out which one to take on. I must say, I love the fact that you flicked through a book, said, I love that mountain, I love that scenery, I'm going to do it, without knowing what it actually entailed. And didn't let yourself talk yourselves out of it either. I just absolutely love that. I think that's brilliant. I could talk to you for ages. I wish I was at a campfire or in a pub with a glass of wine and a big bowl of chips or something, like just to bring it back to food and wine again, to swap stories, because I know I've got so many more I'd love to swap with you, but I do need to wrap things up. I always finish my show with the same 2 questions, and it's going to be interesting to hear what the answers on these ones are going to be. And I need responses from you both on these. So the first one is, if you were told one day that you have the choice to either ride all day perpetually up a climb, or conversely, you would be pedaling all day into a headwind, which one are you going to choose? So, Mary, you go first.
Up a climb, no questions asked.
I thought that might have been the case. And what about you, Chloe?
I'm 100% climb. You can settle into it and take in the scenery, and headwinds are just the worst.
And I guess I had an inkling you might have both said climb, because you came away from a trip that had a lot of climbing with a lot of happy memories. So I feel if the climbs didn't win there. But then conversely, maybe you were sick of them. So having that horrendous headwind on the final day, climbs were always going to win, weren't they?
Yeah.
Okay. And my last question, I think I do know the answer to this, but I'm happy to be surprised. If you were both told that you have the opportunity, you're going to be cycling for 4 hours, and you can choose to cycle for 4 hours on your own or 4 hours in the company of other people, which one would you choose?
Other people.
Yeah, so with others.
With others.
We both chose others.
Both with others. Do either of you enjoy cycling on your own anyway? Like, do you ever cycle on your own?
So I actually did, the only other big cycle trip I did on my own. And I had an incredible time, especially because I spoke to a lot of people. I made an effort everywhere I went, every interaction. But it was just really enjoyable to be with someone else. And when things were tough, to have someone there to go, yeah, this will be great. We'll get through it.
I've only ever done like day cycles, but I used to live in Wales, so I used to do day cycles there by myself. But I actually hate my own company. I get very restless very fast. And everything is more beautiful when you've got someone else to be like, whoa, look at this beauty with. Whereas I think sometimes by yourself, I don't focus so much on where I am. I'm more focused on the challenge.
Anecdotally, I can actually relate to both of those, so that makes sense too. And actually, this is a final question, and I promise I'm wrapping this up, but when you just said there, riding along and being able to share a memory and an experience of going, whoa, look at that. This is a hard question, but if I had to pinpoint you down to that, and it can be a climb or a landscape or an experience, what is the one biggest moment from this trip that made you go, whoa, that you just think so fondly of?
I mean, there's so many insane vistas. I think you called it the balcony part of the Col du Tourmalet.
Col du Tourmalet, yeah.
Like, come through the other side of the storm, it was still really, like, incredible stormy mountainous views. But just that, like, never-ending landscape was really quite special.
Yeah, I have to be really on the fence and say, I just can't. There were so many incredible views and moments and times we laughed, and I can't pick one. It was just such a phenomenal trip.
The whole trip makes you go.
Yeah.
I'm going to allow it because I feel I can resonate with that as well. So beautiful. Chloe and Mary, it has been an absolute pleasure. It's been such an awesome experience for me because speaking with you has allowed me to relive so many different moments for myself as well. And whilst our experiences of travel, our routes were slightly different in times and others were exact, and our weather was different in places, but I feel we can all be aligned with the experiences that we've walked away this coast to coast traversée de Pyrenees vélo with. Such a sense of achievement, and it's been a real pleasure and a great trip just sort of chatting to you about your experiences there.
Thank you for having us. It's been similarly a lot of fun to think back to the trip and see it again through your eyes. And now, as you say, those rose-tinted glasses.
The Type 2 rose-tinted glasses. What's your vision? It's Type 2 vision. Maybe one day the paths will align and we'll get to ride some of these mountain roads together as well. That would be truly incroyable.
We would love that. Thank you so much for having us on your show.
Thank you. I had such a great time chatting with Mary and Chloe and hearing about their own experiences traversing the Pyrenees by bike. I lived through my own experiences as well. It was an absolute pleasure. I want to say a special thank you to you, our listeners of the show, for tuning in each week and also sending me feedback about each episode, letting me know which of the guest stories so far that you have enjoyed and also what you're doing while you're listening. I can tell there's quite a few of you that are actually on bicycle tours at the moment, and that really fills me with joy that you're listening to stories which are inspiring you as you have your own bicycle adventure. On that note, if you'd like to be featured as a guest for the show, then definitely get in touch with me. Send me an email, podcast@seektravelride.com, and we can talk about how we can feature you as a guest for a future show. Until then, my name's Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.